U.S. President Donald Trump extends Zimbabwe sanctions by 1 year. Burundi forces the United Nations to shut its local human rights office after more than 2 decades. And a new study links earlier puberty in girls with personal care products. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent McCory. This is Africa 54. U.S. President Donald Trump continues to keep pressure on the Zimbabwean government by renewing sanctions against the Southern African nation for at least one more year, despite calls from African leaders to end the restrictions. President Trump says Zimbabwe's policies continue to pose a threat to U.S. foreign policy. Serena Chaudhary reports.
Another year of U.S. sanctions for Zimbabwe. President Donald Trump has extended sanctions, saying the new government's policies continue to pose, quote, an unusual and extraordinary threat to America's foreign policy. The renewal comes in spite of calls by African leaders to lift the sanctions and give Zimbabwe a chance to recover from its economic crisis. But Trump administration officials say the sanctions will remain in place until President Emmerson Mnangagwa changes some of Zimbabwe's laws. These include regulations around restricting media freedom and allowing protests. Zimbabwe is trying to turn around its economic fortunes following the end of Robert Mugabe's rule. But a chronic cash crunch continues to hamper business and is causing shortages in medicines, food and fuel. The Reserve Bank said on Monday it has borrowed $985 million from African banks to purchase fuel and other critical imports.
Well, that was Serena Chaudhary of Reuters with that report. Now, for more insight into the sanctions on Zimbabwe, Piers Pigo, an international crisis group senior consultant for Southern Africa, joins me live via Skype from Johannesburg. Good evening, Piers.
Good day to you, Vincent, and to your viewers.
Now, let's first talk about the nature of the sanctions and how effective they have been anyway up to this point.
Well, you know, we're talking about a set of what some people describe as targeted sanctions, which are against certain individuals and certain entities, companies, farms, and so forth. At the moment, the list is being whittled down to about 85 individuals and I think it's 56 entities. As I said, this involves a number of companies, some farms, several entities, which are directly linked to the ruling party, ZANU-PF. Now, the list was significantly bigger than this in its heyday around 2008 and expanded up to, I think, over 140, 150 individuals and 80 or so entities. And a number of those people have been taken off. But if one looks at the list, and I had a look at it earlier in February, and I don't think it's changed since then, there are a number of people on that list who you could ask why are they still there, are no longer directly associated with the ruling party and so forth. So there's a sense of laziness in some respects, Vincent, that there hasn't been a thorough review.
Now,
but, you know, what is the impact, you ask? And there's a huge question about the impact. With people arguing that these measures are responsible for the economic conditions that Zimbabwe finds itself in. Frankly, this is not a sustainable argument. These are targeted measures which may well have chilling effects beyond and impacts beyond the individuals and entities that are being targeted. But these are not general comprehensive economic sanctions that you'd see against a country like Iran or North Korea.
Now, Piers, some have looked at countries that have been under sanctions and said, at the end of the day, those who suffer actually, just the citizens, the ordinary citizens, the leadership and those in the elite class don't seem to be seriously affected. Is that the case in Zimbabwe?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, I understand this argument is made by a lot of people, and we've seen the resuscitation in the last month or so in the wake of the protests and the violent clampdown that followed that, a resuscitation of not only a regime change narrative and allegations against domestic civil society players, the opposition, and their so-called international sponsors, but a resuscitation also of the sanctions narrative that had been sort of quietly tucked away by the new administration of Mnangagwa. Indeed, both Emmerson Mnangagwa and his finance minister, Ntuli Ngube, have both said that they can no longer use the sanctions argument. They both said that last year. It's interesting that Mnangagwa and a number of people around the government and ZANU-PF have resuscitated that in this way. Mm-hmm. There is essentially no evidence, Vincent, strong evidence to show how widespread the impact has been. And it's unlikely that a set of measures that restrict certain individuals and entities. And I should just point out, these measures do not stop trade.
Okay. Well, Piers, thank you very much. We do appreciate your insights. We're looking again one of these days. That's Piers Pico, who is an international crisis group senior consultant for Southern Africa. Now, after fleeing fighting in their native Ngovo village and taking shelter in a nearby United Nations protection of civilian site in Wau, South Sudan, some South Sudanese have returned to their village, hoping the peace deal will allow them to rebuild their lives. We get more in this report by Nigeria's Channels Television.
Ngovo village was a peaceful place to live until conflict erupted in the western Bahr el Ghazal region of South Sudan in June 2016, forcing thousands of families to flee. 19-year-old Regina Peter was amongst those displaced after her father was killed in Ngovo. She initially headed to nearby Bagari, only to find a dire situation there too.
When we reached Bagari village, we stayed in the bush. We were exposed to rain, and there were disease outbreaks like malaria and diarrhea. We had to resort to local herbs, as there were no medical facilities.
Regina's family ended up seeking sanctuary at a United Nations protection site, some 15 kilometers away in Wau. She decided to leave the camp and move back to her home in Ngovo after the security situation improved and a major cleanup campaign carried out by UNMISS, United Nations agencies and other international and local humanitarian partners in the community. Although the process of rebuilding their lives has been a challenge, Regina, her brother and two sisters, who all live with their mother, are happy to be back.
We don't have any food ration cards because we arrived here late and we were not able to register. So sometimes we get food from the church and sometimes we get it from people who receive their cards and choose to share with us.
40-year-old Maige Lena James was also affected by the conflict. She lost her husband, the breadwinner of the family. But she hopes the country's new peace deal will make things better. Since fighting erupted in the capital, Juba, in December 2013, some 4.5 million South Sudanese have been displaced from their homes. Of these, 2 million have been internally displaced and 2.5 million have sought refuge in neighboring countries.
Well, that report was by Channels Television in Lagos. Now, Burundi has forced the United Nations to shut its local human rights office after 23 years. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, said in a statement Tuesday that the Central African States government has declared it had made sufficient progress in human rights so that the existence of the UN office was no longer justified. However, according to Bachelet, many advancements in human rights in Burundi had been jeopardized since 2015, when President Pierre Nkurunziza announced he would seek a third term. Violence surged after the announcement, which many saw as a breach of the Constitution. He won re-election, but the decision to stand sparked a protest and a security crackdown that left hundreds dead and prompted around 500,000 to flee abroad. In October 2016, Burundi suspended all cooperation with the UN office in Burundi following publication of a report by UN independent investigation that said the government and its supporters were responsible for crimes against humanity. An environmental movement is growing in Europe, and it's looking to come to the U.S. kids and teenagers skipping class to protest and raise awareness of climate change issues. While their cause is mostly praised, their method is controversial. Should students go on school strikes for political issues? Marcus Meyer-Killen explains.
Students skipping school to protest for climate action. In various countries, mostly European, this has been going on for months. Every Friday, thousands of teenagers leave classrooms in Belgium, Germany, France, Australia and more to demand stricter climate policies. Their dramatic and controversial message: why go to school if there's no future to live for? This is the girl who started it all, then 15-year-old environmental activist Greta Thunberg from Sweden. Last summer, Greta started her school strike for climate, refusing to go to school on Fridays and instead sitting in front of the Swedish parliament. Social media made her famous. When she was invited to speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos last year, she made her message very clear.
I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act.
That's not democracy! This is democracy!
Thunberg's hashtags, School Strike for Climate and Fridays for Future, are now leading teenagers to rally on the street instead of in the classroom.
If governments don't do anything, the world will be a lot worse place because there'll be extreme storms, droughts, flooding, wars over natural resources. So there'll be a loss of stability across the world.
I skipped school today. Well, you can't even really say skipped, because I think climate change is such a big deal that it should be okay to miss 2 hours of class for that.
The movement has picked up endorsements from European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and British Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn, who said it was inspiring to see them making their voices heard. Conservatives have been less supportive. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison voiced his disapproval last November.
Kids should go to school. That's what we're committed to. We don't support the idea of kids not going to school to participate in things that can be dealt with outside of school. And so what we want is more learning in schools and less activism in schools.
British Prime Minister Theresa May also voiced her concern. Greta Thunberg replied, tweeting that May's accusations of wasting valuable lesson time may well be true, but she added, political leaders have wasted 30 years of inaction, and that is slightly worse.
If the children do something, then Theresa May will notice. And people say children can't do anything, but they can do it against grown-ups.
So far, the majority of school strikes have been in Europe, but more and more countries are joining. The movement is expected to hit the US on March 15th. Many groups have declared an international strike day that will most likely create even more controversy. Marcus Meyer-Killen for VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Madur with a look at how everyday products affect the hormones of girls. Lino.
That's right, Vincent. Today we are looking at how hormones disrupting chemicals may be affecting our health. Get this, girls exposed before birth to chemicals found in some personal care products may enter puberty earlier. That's according to research published in the Journal of Human Reproduction and funded by the U.S. National Institute of Environment Health Sciences. Scientists say some chemicals found in daily personal care products like soap or toothpaste are endocrine disruptors known or suspected to alter the way hormones work inside our body in reproduction, metabolism, and other important processes. They include phthalates, often found in scented products like perfumes and shampoos, parabens used as preservatives in cosmetics, and phenols such as triclosan added to some toothpastes. The results were drawn from data collected by the Long-Term Center for the Health Assessment of Mothers and Children of Salinas Chamacos study. Chamacos has followed mothers and their children in California's Salinas Valley from pre-birth to adolescence to document how environmental exposures early in life may affect childhood development. Today we reached out to the American Chemistry Council, who issued a statement saying in part, quote, "Our industry takes new scientific findings involving the safety of our products seriously and weighs those findings alongside existing evidence." As Professor Dr. John Ioannidis of Stanford University noted in his seminal paper, the majority of published epidemiology studies, particularly the first few of a given topic, are later proved wrong. The authors of this study similarly acknowledge several limitations and urge caution about how the findings are interpreted. The Personal Care Products Council notes diethyl phthalate, the only phthalate with significant usage in cosmetics, has been well studied and concluded to be safe for use in cosmetics by authorities throughout the world, end quote. Now, Dr. Leonardo Trasande is an associate professor in pediatrics, environmental medicine, and population health at New York University. He is also author of the book Sicker, Fatter, Poorer: The Urgent Threat of Hormone-Disrupting Chemicals to Our Health and Future, and What Can Be Done About It. I sat with Dr. Trasande to talk about some of the hormone-disrupting chemicals and how to avoid them. Take a look.
So hormones are signaling molecules for so many bodily functions. They make sure we maintain a healthy body temperature, maintain good metabolism, and they're crucial for all the bodily functions like salt, sugar, and even sex. And synthetic chemicals disrupt hormones by scrambling the signals and thereby contributing to disease and disability. We haven't tested the entirety of synthetic chemicals for their effects on hormonal functions, but we know of at least 1,000 synthetic chemicals that can disrupt hormones and thereby contribute to disease. The science is strongest in particular for 4 categories of chemicals: the phthalates that are used in personal care products, cosmetics, and food packaging; bisphenols that are used in aluminum can linings and thermal paper receipts; pesticides, which are used in agriculture; and brominated flame retardants, which are used in electronics, carpeting, and even furniture.
So let's break it down one at a time. Talk to us about the phthalate and how it is used and affects us.
Yes. So phthalates are used in a variety of ways. They're used to make plastics softer. They're used to make certain cosmetics stick to the skin better, and they're also used to help with the added scent. But the reality is that these chemicals also are similar in structure to testosterone, and in particular affect male sex hormone function in a variety of ways. And what little we know about phthalates is that they are associated with decreases in sperm count among adult men. In addition, it's recognized that testosterone is crucial for potency and libido, and so far as chemicals affect testosterone, they are likely to contribute to impotence, which we know affects 40% of men above the age of 40. In addition, it's not just the lifestyle matter we're talking about. We're literally talking in some cases about a life and death matter, because literally we know that testosterone is important as a marker for predicting coronary heart disease or even stroke among adult men. It's been associated consistently now with this major morbidity.
How do you avoid phthalate if they're so commonly used in products?
Fortunately, there are safe and simple steps we all can take to limit phthalate exposure. Looking at the recycling number on plastic containers is important. The numbers 3, 6, and 7 are the ones to avoid across the board. 3 is for phthalates, which we talked about, inhibit sex hormone function. They also are known to disrupt metabolism, shifting calories into fat or sugar when they're intended to be shifted into muscle. So insofar as we know, these chemicals also contribute to obesity and diabetes. The number 6 is for styrene, which is a known carcinogen, and 7 is a category of bisphenols, chemicals that are known synthetic estrogens and may also be contributing to obesity.
Let's go more in depth about bisphenol. Yes. You mentioned it earlier. Talk to us about that.
So the science over the past 2 decades has increasingly made us recognize that chemicals can literally make us fatter. So the prototype chemical is bisphenol A, or BPA, received a lot of attention in the news about a decade ago because it was banned from baby bottles and sippy cups. It's used mostly to make plastic hard. And the reality is that BPA has all of the molecular characteristics that make it an obesogen. It makes fat cells bigger, it disrupts the function of a protein that protects the heart called adiponectin, and it's a synthetic estrogen, so during puberty especially it can have sex-specific effects on body mass.
How do you first identify it and then avoid it?
Well, right now there are two major uses of bisphenols. One is in thermal paper receipts. It gives that characteristic shiny surface that is used to burn in print as opposed to the old school typewriter. That's used to print receipts, and it's also used to prevent corrosion in aluminum cans. Now, bisphenol A doesn't discriminate by the type of can, whether it's soda, beer, vegetables, or fruit, or even tuna. And there's been a lot of attention to BPA-free. We've seen that on a lot of cans. The reality, though, is BPA is increasingly being replaced by chemicals like BPS, BPF. These are all bisphenols that have structures that are quite similar. In fact, there are about 40 of them on the market now. What little we know about BPS is that it's as estrogenic, as disruptive to function of embryos, and even more persistent in the environment. So it may even be a serious, regrettable substitute. We call this problem chemical whack-a-mole, where one chemical is moved aside because of health concerns, and it's replaced with a chemical cousin, if you will, that has similar, if not worse, side effects.
So the alternative will be?
The alternative, fortunately, is not to use canned foods at all and to say no to that thermal paper receipt.
Furthermore, Dr. Trasande says to avoid microwaving food in plastic container. We'll have more on hormone-disrupting chemicals with Dr. Trasande next time. Now, researchers are presenting to a conference Tuesday to second known case of a person who shows no sign of the virus that causes AIDS after undergoing a stem cell transplant and halting the use of antiretroviral drugs. In a study published Monday in the journal Nature, lead author Ravindra Gupta of University College in London describes the man as being free of the human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, for 18 months since stopping the typical drug treatment that can suppress the virus but not cure patients. The man who wishes to remain anonymous was diagnosed with HIV in 2003 and began taking the antiretroviral drugs in 2012. After developing Hodgkin's lymphoma, he began stem cell treatments in 2016, then discontinued the antiretroviral drugs. Researchers who monitored his viral loads have found no trace of HIV since then. Gupta says the key to the stem cell treatment is the use of cells from a donor with a rare double copy of a gene mutation that is naturally resistant to HIV. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Vincent, back to you.
Very, very useful information. Thanks a lot, Lenore. I'll be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday right here on Africa 54. U.S. President Trump says he will cooperate with the investigation of his 2016 presidential campaign and business empire launched Monday by opposition Democrats in the House of Representatives. President Trump continues to deny any wrongdoing involving his campaign's links to Russia and during his presidency. VOA White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has more.
It's been a tumultuous 2 years since U.S. President Donald Trump took office, and it's about to get even stormier.
We'll do everything we can to get whatever evidence. We are starting this investigation.
On Monday, the House Judiciary Committee requested documents from more than 80 people within the Trump administration, family, and business, including former personal lawyer Michael Cohen, sons Eric and Don Jr., and son-in-law Jared Kushner, as part of its investigation on allegations of obstruction of justice, corruption, and abuse of power. The White House said it would respond at the appropriate time.
I cooperate all the time with everybody. And you know the beautiful thing? No collusion. It's all a hoax.
Trump denies wrongdoing involving Russian meddling of his 2016 election. The House Judiciary is the powerful committee in charge of impeachment proceedings, which has investigated Presidents Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton on charges of obstruction of justice and abuse of power. So far, this investigation is not an impeachment process.
Whether this becomes a scandal for Donald Trump on the proportions of Watergate, the only scandal that has actually forced a president to leave office prematurely, remains to be seen as to what occurs in those public hearings.
The investigation is separate from the Russia probe led by Robert Mueller, the results of which are expected shortly.
We just don't know what might come out in this report about conspiracy with the Russians. There's certainly a lot of smoke. Remains to be seen if there's fire.
The House probe is an additional blow after damning testimony last week by the president's former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen.
Everybody's job at the Trump Organization is to protect Mr. Trump. Every day, most of us knew we were coming in and we were going to lie for him on something. And that became the norm. And that's exactly what's happening right now in this country.
There are other court investigations of the president's inner circle, including the Southern District of New York, New Jersey, and Washington, D.C. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
Well, and here's what's trending. Gadgets stole the show at the 2019 Barcelona Mobile World Congress. The Korean company Toruk presented Luku, the 1.5-foot-tall social robot equipped with touch sensors, microphones, and 3D depth cameras to understand its environment and interpret the owner's mood. Robotic arms aimed at improving efficiency in routine work caught the attention of passers-by at the Beat booth, where a robot handed out cups of coffee. Customers can place their orders through a mobile app or using voice commands. SR presented their simulated reality technology to improve the immersive 3D experience by removing the need for glasses and headgear. The company says their technology tracks the eyes to offer the best image in an up to 8K monitor. And finally, a conductor's baton has been created, which allows the visually impaired to follow its movements, opening up the potential for blind people to join more orchestras. The haptic baton contains sensors that pick up even slight motions. These are then transmitted via radio signals to vibrating devices attached to musicians' wrists or ankles. They vibrate and buzz in different ways to indicate to the player the pace and dynamics the conductor wants. The haptic baton is a prototype being tested with musicians. Its development is ongoing, but the inventor hopes it will be available to rent or buy in 2020. And that's what's trending today. Well, and that's our show. Thanks a lot for watching. I want to wish you all a good night.